Get ready for a wild ride. This story has everything: entitled people, shocking betrayals, and one incredible twist you won't see coming. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss a single minute of this unbelievable HOA drama. The story doesn't just begin at the HOA meeting. It begins weeks earlier with a slow, insidious buildup of discriminatory actions by the Oakhaven HOA, specifically targeting Sarah Miller and her son Alex. Sarah, a dedicated nurse working long hours at the local hospital, moved to Oakhaven for its supposed tranquility and family-friendly atmosphere. Alex, despite his physical limitations, is a bright, inquisitive 17-year-old with a passion for law, devouring legal textbooks and online courses in his spare time. He uses a high-tech, customized wheelchair, a symbol of his independence, not his limitations. The trouble started subtly. First, it was seemingly innocuous warnings about Alex's wheelchair leaving tire tracks on the common lawn, tracks that were barely visible and easily washed away by the rain. Then came complaints about the unsightly ramp leading to their front door, a ramp that Sarah had meticulously ensured met all ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, requirements and was professionally installed. These complaints were always delivered with a saccharine sweet smile by Mrs. Gable, the HOA secretary, a woman whose politeness felt like a thinly veiled threat. Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, never directly addressed Sarah. He preferred to communicate through Mrs. Gable, maintaining a distance that amplified his perceived authority. Sarah tried to address these issues amicably, writing letters, attending board meetings, and even offering to plant flowering bushes around the ramp to make it more aesthetically pleasing. Her efforts were consistently met with bureaucratic roadblocks and dismissive comments. Mr. Henderson, a retired real estate developer with a reputation for being ruthless and uncompromising, seemed to take a particular delight in making things difficult for Sarah. He clearly saw her and Alex as undesirables, a threat to the pristine, homogeneous image he was determined to maintain for Oakhaven. He often referred to the community's standards and property values, using these terms as weapons to justify his discriminatory actions. Alex, meanwhile, wasn't fooled. He observed the subtle microaggressions, the condescending tones, and the way his mother was being systematically marginalized. He started documenting everything, every warning, every letter, every interaction with Mrs. Gable and Mr. Henderson. He meticulously researched HOA laws, state and federal disability rights legislation and relevant case precedents. He built a comprehensive file, a silent arsenal of legal ammunition. He knew that his mother, exhausted from her work and the constant stress of dealing with the HOA, was nearing her breaking point. He resolved to protect her, even if it meant revealing a secret he'd been carefully guarding. The culmination of this campaign of disrespect arrived at the monthly HOA meeting. The agenda item regarding landscaping regulations and compliance was deliberately placed last, ensuring maximum attendance and, in Mr. Henderson's mind, maximum humiliation for Sarah. He began with a lengthy, self-congratulatory preamble about Oakhaven's exceptional standards and the importance of maintaining uniformity. He then projected images onto a large screen, pictures of various homes in the community, highlighting violations. The final image was a close-up of Sarah's ramp, dramatically lit to emphasize its perceived ugliness. Mr. Henderson launched into a prepared speech, his voice dripping with condescension. He described the ramp as an eyesore, a detriment to property values, and a blatant disregard for the community's aesthetic guidelines. He used carefully chosen words, avoiding overtly discriminatory language, but the underlying message was clear. Alex and his needs were unwelcome. Mrs. Gable sat beside him, nodding in agreement and occasionally interjecting with supportive comments, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. Sarah, her face pale but her voice steady, attempted to defend herself. She explained once again the necessity of the ramp, its compliance with ADA regulations, and her previous attempts to address the HOA's concerns. Mr. Henderson cut her off mid-sentence, his voice rising in mock indignation. He accused her of being unreasonable, uncooperative, and playing the victim. He then delivered the final blow, a statement designed to publicly shame and silence her. Mrs. Miller, perhaps you and your son would be more comfortable in a community that caters to his special needs. Oakhaven has a reputation to uphold. The word son was emphasized with a sneer and air quotes. The room was silent. Some residents looked down, ashamed. Others avoided eye contact. A few loyal supporters of Mr. Henderson smirked. Alex, however, remained perfectly still. His eyes, usually filled with warmth and intelligence, were now cold and hard. He had anticipated this moment, prepared for it. The months of quiet observation, the meticulous research, the carefully crafted plan, all were about to come to fruition. He gently placed a hand on his mother's arm, a silent reassurance. The public humiliation intended to break them had instead ignited a fire within him. He was no longer just Alex, the disabled teenager. He was Alex, the legal prodigy ready to unleash his carefully concealed expertise. He was ready for court. The scene shifts to the local courthouse, a stark, imposing building that stands in sharp contrast to the manicured lawns of Oakhaven. Sarah, having exhausted all other options, has filed a lawsuit against the Oakhaven HOA, alleging discrimination under the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. She's represented by a young, earnest lawyer, Mr. Davis, who, while well-intentioned, is clearly outmatched by the HOA's legal team. The HOA has hired a formidable law firm, represented by the sharp and intimidating Ms. Catherine Sterling, a woman known for her ruthless courtroom tactics and her impeccable track record. The courtroom is packed. Residents of Oakhaven fill the gallery, a mixture of curious onlookers and staunch supporters of Mr. Henderson, who sits in the front row, radiating an air of smug confidence. Mrs. Gable is beside him, clutching a thick binder filled with documents, her expression a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Miss Sterling, impeccably dressed in a power suit, exudes an aura of authority. She presents a seemingly airtight case, focusing on the HOA's right to enforce its regulations and maintain the community's aesthetic standards. She skillfully downplays the discriminatory aspects of the case, framing it as a simple matter of contract law and property rights. Mr. Davis, on the other hand, struggles to gain traction. He presents evidence of Sarah's compliance with ADA regulations, her attempts to negotiate with the HOA, and the emotional distress caused by their actions. However, Ms. Sterling effectively counters his arguments, poking holes in his evidence and portraying Sarah as an unreasonable and litigious homeowner. The judge, a stern but fair woman named Judge Thompson, listens intently, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions. As the proceedings progress, Sarah becomes increasingly disheartened. Ms. Sterling's relentless questioning and the seemingly insurmountable legal obstacles are taking their toll. She begins to doubt her chances of success, the weight of the HOA's power and resources feeling overwhelming. Alex, sitting beside her in his wheelchair, observes the courtroom dynamics with a keen eye. He notices the subtle ways Ms. Sterling manipulates the narrative, the judge's reactions to certain arguments, and the weaknesses in Mr. Davis's presentation. He's been quietly taking notes, his mind racing, analyzing the legal strategies and identifying potential counterarguments. During a brief recess, Alex whispers to his mother, "Mom, let me speak. I know I can help." Sarah is hesitant. She knows Alex is brilliant, but he's only 17 and he's never argued a case in court before. The stakes are incredibly high. However, seeing the desperation in his eyes and remembering his unwavering dedication to this cause, she makes a momentous decision. She trusts her son. When the court reconvenes, Sarah addresses Judge Thompson, her voice trembling slightly. "Your Honor, I would like to request that my son Alex Miller be allowed to address the court." The request causes a stir in the courtroom. Mr. Henderson leans forward, a look of disbelief and amusement on his face. Miss Sterling raises an eyebrow, a hint of condescension in her smile. Judge Thompson, intrigued, grants the request, reminding Alex that he will be held to the same standards as any lawyer. Alex wheels himself forward, positioning his wheelchair directly in front of the judge's bench. The courtroom falls silent. All eyes are on him. He begins to speak, his voice clear and confident, his tone surprisingly mature and authoritative. He starts by dismantling Ms. Sterling's argument piece by piece, citing specific legal precedents, statutes, and regulations that directly contradict her claims. He reveals that he meticulously researched not only the Fair Housing Act and the ADA but also the specific bylaws of the Oakhaven HOA, finding numerous inconsistencies and instances where the HOA had selectively enforced its rules. He presents his meticulously compiled documentation, the warnings, the letters, the transcripts of HOA meetings, highlighting the pattern of discriminatory behavior. He points out that the HOA's aesthetic standards were applied arbitrarily and inconsistently, targeting his family while ignoring similar violations by other residents. He even presents evidence gathered from online real estate listings and public records, showing that the presence of his ramp had actually increased the property value of his home, directly refuting Mr. Henderson's claims. He doesn't just rely on legal arguments, he also appeals to the judge's sense of justice and fairness. He speaks passionately about the importance of inclusivity and accessibility, about the right of people with disabilities to live with dignity and respect. He shares personal anecdotes, describing the challenges he faces on a daily basis and the impact the HOA's actions have had on his life and his mother's. He directly questions and cross-examines Mr. Henderson. His performance is captivating. The courtroom, initially filled with skepticism and amusement, is now silent, hanging on his every word. Mr. Davis watches in awe, realizing he's witnessing something extraordinary. Miss Sterling, initially dismissive, is visibly shaken. Her carefully constructed arguments are crumbling under the weight of Alex's legal brilliance. Mr. Henderson shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his smug confidence replaced by a look of growing panic. The tide has turned. Alex Miller, the disabled teenager they had so cruelly mocked, has become their worst nightmare. Alex's legal assault doesn't stop at simply defending his mother's case. He goes on the offensive, exposing a deeper, more sinister plot beneath the surface of the HOA's seemingly petty actions. He shifts his focus from the ramp itself to the underlying motivations of Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Gable, hinting at a conspiracy that extends beyond mere prejudice. He begins by presenting evidence he'd painstakingly gathered, evidence that Mr. Davis and Sarah were completely unaware of. He starts with the HOA's financial records, which he obtained through a carefully worded subpoena, a legal tactic he'd learned from his online law courses. He points out several irregularities, unusually large payments to a landscaping company, Green Vista Landscaping, owned by Mr. Henderson's brother-in-law Robert Bob Johnson. These payments, Alex argues, were significantly above market rate and coincided precisely with the period when the HOA began targeting Sarah and Alex. He then introduces a series of emails, obtained through a clever bit of digital sleuthing, another skill he'd honed in his spare time. These emails, exchanged between Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Gable, contain coded language that, upon Alex's expert interpretation, reveals a plan to force Sarah to sell her home. The emails mention Project Nightingale, and refer to Sarah's property as the prime target. Alex explains that Nightingale is a reference to Florence Nightingale, a famous nurse, a clear, albeit veiled, reference to Sarah's profession. Alex then connects the dots, presenting a compelling theory. Mr. Henderson, leveraging his position as HOA president, was using the landscaping regulations and the manufactured complaints about Alex's ramp as a pretext to drive down Sarah's property value. He intended to force her to sell at a below-market price, allowing his brother-in-law Bob Johnson, through Green Vista Landscaping, to purchase the property, renovate it, and flip it for a substantial profit. The HOA, under Mr. Henderson's control, would then approve all the renovations, ensuring a smooth and profitable transaction. To further solidify his case, Alex calls a surprise witness, Mr. Johnson, Bob Johnson himself. Mr. Johnson, initially reluctant and evasive, is visibly uncomfortable under Alex's relentless questioning. Alex presents him with the emails, the financial records, and a series of leading questions designed to expose the truth. He skillfully uses legal techniques such as impeachment by prior inconsistent statement, to corner Mr. Johnson and force him to admit to the scheme. Under pressure, Mr. Johnson cracks. He confesses to the entire plan, revealing that Mr. Henderson had promised him a significant cut of the profits in exchange for his cooperation. He admits that the landscaping company was essentially a front for their illegal activities, used to launder money and funnel funds. He also reveals that Mr. Henderson had used similar tactics in the past, targeting other vulnerable homeowners and forcing them to sell their properties at unfairly low prices. The courtroom is stunned. The residents of Oak Haven, who had initially supported Mr. Henderson, are now horrified by the extent of his corruption and deceit. Miss Sterling, realizing her case is completely unraveling, tries to distance herself from her client, claiming she was unaware of his illegal activities. Mr. Davis is speechless, utterly amazed by Alex's investigative skills and legal acumen. Judge Thompson, visibly angered by the revelations, calls for a recess to review the new evidence. She orders an immediate investigation into Mr. Henderson's and Mrs. Gable's financial records and their past dealings with the HOA. She also orders Mr. Johnson to be taken into custody for questioning. Alex, exhausted but triumphant, wheels himself back to his mother. Sarah embraces him, tears streaming down her face. She's overwhelmed with pride and relief. The truth, so carefully concealed by Mr. Henderson and his cronies, has been brought to light by her son, the young man they had so callously underestimated. The conspiracy, designed to enrich a few at the expense of the vulnerable, has been exposed, thanks to the courage and brilliance of a disabled teenager who refused to be silenced. The whispers of past residents who have been targeted by him come to light as some were present during the session. Following the explosive revelations in court and the subsequent investigation ordered by Judge Thompson, the full extent of Mr. Henderson's and Mrs. Gable's corruption is laid bare. The investigation uncovers a decade-long pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Mr. Henderson had been systematically targeting vulnerable homeowners, the elderly, single parents, those with disabilities, using his position as HOA president to intimidate them, manufacture violations, and ultimately force them to sell their homes at below-market prices. Mrs. Gable, his loyal accomplice, had been instrumental in facilitating these schemes, falsifying documents and manipulating HOA records. The financial records reveal a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts used to launder the profits from their illicit activities. Bob Johnson, Mr. Henderson's brother-in-law, provides further damning testimony, detailing the inner workings of their operation and implicating several other individuals within the Oakhaven community who had been complicit in their schemes. Judge Thompson, in a strongly worded ruling, finds the Oakhaven HOA liable for discrimination under the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. She awards Sarah significant monetary damages, covering not only the emotional distress caused by the HOA's actions but also punitive damages designed to deter future misconduct. She orders the immediate removal of Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Gable from their positions within the HOA, permanently barring them from holding any office of authority within the community. Furthermore, Judge Thompson refers the case to the state's Attorney General for criminal prosecution. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Gable are subsequently indicted on multiple charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. They face lengthy prison sentences and substantial fines. Bob Johnson, having cooperated with the authorities, receives a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. The Oakhaven community is shaken by the scandal. The residents, many of whom had blindly trusted Mr. Henderson, are forced to confront the reality of his corruption and the harm he had inflicted on their neighbors. A new HOA board is elected, composed of individuals committed to transparency, fairness, and inclusivity. The discriminatory regulations are repealed, and the community begins the long process of healing and rebuilding trust. As for Alex, his legal triumph catapults him into the national spotlight. He receives widespread acclaim for his courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to justice. He's flooded with offers from prestigious law schools, scholarships, and internships. He becomes a sought-after speaker, sharing his story and advocating for the rights of people with disabilities. Sarah, finally free from the stress and anxiety of the HOA's harassment, is able to focus on her career and her son. She's incredibly proud of Alex, not just for his legal victory but for the compassionate and determined young man he has become. The bond between them, forged in adversity, is stronger than ever. The story concludes with Alex accepting a full scholarship to Harvard Law School, his dream since childhood. He stands before a crowd of well-wishers, including his mother, Mr. Davis, and many of the Oakhaven residents who had once doubted him. He delivers a powerful speech, emphasizing the importance of fighting for justice, even when the odds seem insurmountable. He speaks about the power of knowledge, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the need for empathy and understanding in a world often marked by prejudice and discrimination. He dedicates his victory not only to his mother but to all those who have been marginalized and silenced, reminding them that they are not alone and that their voices deserve to be heard. The final scene shows Alex and Sarah driving away from Oakhaven, leaving behind the community that had once tried to break them. They're heading towards a brighter future filled with hope and opportunity. Alex's journey from a disabled teenager mocked in court to a celebrated legal prodigy is a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The ramp, once a symbol of contention, now stands as a symbol of triumph, a physical manifestation of Alex's victory and a reminder that even the most seemingly insurmountable obstacles can be overcome with courage, intelligence, and a belief in oneself. The whispers of the wrongly accused before were not unheard, and now it brought change. Wow, what a story. If you loved seeing justice prevail and Alex take down the HOA, make sure you're subscribed for more incredible tales of triumph. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.